She won't last 3 days, I guarantee it. Travis Boland said it loud, real loud, the kind of loud that fills a room and waits for people to join in. They did. 16 combat-hardened candidates turned and looked at the woman who had just walked through the door. Some laughed openly, some smirked. One whispered something that made the man beside him laugh harder. Maya Carter set her gear bag down. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word. She just started unpacking, slow, steady, deliberate, while the laughter bounced off every wall around her. That silence was her first answer. It would not be her last. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The morning Maya Carter walked into the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, she already knew what was going to happen. She had prepared for it. Not the training, not the drills, not the cold water or the physical demands, or the endless hours of stress shooting under screaming instructors. She had prepared for the moment people looked at her and decided before she ever opened her mouth, before she ever picked up a rifle, before she ever took a single step on that training ground, that she did not belong there. She had prepared for that because she had lived with that her entire life. And every single time she had proven every single one of them wrong. Maya was 31 years old when she walked through those doors. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall. She had dark hair pulled back tight against her head, brown eyes that had a way of staying completely still when everything around her was moving, and a posture that didn't announce itself, didn't demand attention, just existed with a kind of quiet certainty that some people read as confidence and others read as arrogance. And most people, when they first looked at her, didn't read at all. Because most people didn't look twice. That was always her advantage. She had come to Coronado after nearly a decade working as a Navy intelligence specialist. She had spent years behind desks and screens analyzing information, building profiles, tracking patterns that other people missed. She was good at her job. She was very good at her job. But something inside her had been restless for a long time, and one morning she woke up and she finally put a name to what it was. She wanted to be in the field, not watching, not analyzing there. She wanted to be the person who made the decision in real time, in real terrain, under real pressure. She wanted to test everything she had built inside herself against the hardest standards she could find. And the hardest standards she could find after years of military service, and everything she had studied and every conversation she had ever had with her grandfather about what it meant to truly master something, was the sniper qualification pathway attached to the Naval Special Warfare Preparation Program. So she volunteered, and when her commanding officer read the paperwork, he looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Carter, are you absolutely sure about this?" She said yes. He approved the transfer, and that was how she ended up standing in a Coronado barracks on a Tuesday morning in March 2025, holding her gear bag, while Travis Boland laughed at her from across the room. Travis Boland was 26 years old, a former Army Ranger who had transferred laterally into the Naval Special Warfare pipeline because, as he had told people at least a dozen times since arriving, he wanted a real challenge. He was 6 feet 2, built like someone had assembled him specifically to intimidate other human beings, and he had a way of talking that made everything sound like an audition for a position he had already decided was his. I was not the only one who laughed that morning. There were 14 other candidates in the barracks. Some of them laughed outright. Some of them smiled in a way that was almost the same thing. Some of them just looked away, which was its own kind of statement. One of them, a quiet man named Rodriguez, who had been sitting on his bunk lacing his boots when Maya walked in, glanced up at her, and then went back to his laces without any expression at all. She noticed that. She filed it away. And then there was Boland. "Somebody tell me," he said again, because the first time hadn't gotten quite the reaction he was looking for, "what exactly the selection criteria are for this program, because I have been under the impression this was a serious operation." A few more people laughed. Maya walked to her assigned bunk, set her gear bag down, and began unpacking. She didn't respond. She had learned a long time ago that responding to people like Travis Boland in the first 5 minutes only ever gave them more material to work with. The only thing that ever actually silenced someone like that was time, performance, results. So she unpacked her bag and she waited. But Boland wasn't finished. He pushed off the bunk he had been leaning against and took a few steps in her direction, not close enough to be physically threatening, just close enough to ensure that what he said next would carry to everyone in the room. "I'll give it 2 days," he said. "3 tops. Hell Week hasn't even started, and she already looks like she's about to cry." Maya folded a shirt and placed it in her locker. One of the other candidates, a tall, blonde woman named Patterson, who had arrived 2 days earlier and had already made it clear she was there to compete and not to make friends, said from across the room. "Boland, give it a rest." "I'm just being honest," Boland said. "Somebody has to be." "You're being loud," Patterson said. "There's a difference." That quieted him for a moment. Just a moment. Maya closed her locker, sat down on her bunk, and for the first time since she had walked in, she looked directly at Travis Boland. Not with anger, not with challenge, just looked at him the way you look at something you have already understood completely and no longer need to spend energy thinking about. Then she looked away, and that somehow seemed to bother him more than anything else she could have done. The first full briefing happened 2 hours later in a long room with fluorescent lights and metal chairs arranged in rows facing a whiteboard. The program instructor walked in without ceremony, set a folder on the table at the front of the room, and looked at all 16 candidates for a few seconds without saying anything. His name was Senior Chief Daniel Reynolds. I was 52 years old, and he had the kind of face that had been built by decades of weather and experience and decisions made in places most people never saw and would never fully understand. He was not tall, he was not physically imposing. He had gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that ran deep, and he stood at the front of that room with his hands clasped behind his back and said nothing for almost 30 full seconds. Some of the candidates shifted in their seats. Boland crossed his arms. Maya sat completely still. 16 of you walked in here today," Reynolds finally said. His voice was flat and direct, not theatrical, not performative, just the voice of a man who had stopped feeling the need to convince anyone of anything a long time ago. "Statistically based on this program's completion history, somewhere between 3 and 5 of you will finish what you started. The rest of you will leave. Some of you will leave because your bodies give out. Some of you will leave because your minds give out. And some of you will leave because you discover somewhere in the middle of this that the thing you thought you wanted and the thing you were actually willing to pay for are not the same thing." He paused. "That discovery," he said, "is not a failure. It is information. And information in this context is something I want you all to learn to value above almost everything else." He picked up a marker and wrote 3 words on the whiteboard: patience, observation, precision. "Everything we do in the next several months comes back to these 3 things," he said. "You will be tested physically. You will be tested technically. You will be tested under conditions designed to break your concentration and compromise your judgment. But at the center of everything is this: can you remain functional, accurate, and invisible when everything around you is telling you to panic?" He looked at the room. "Most people cannot," he said. "Most people under enough pressure stop thinking and start reacting. And in the environment you are training for, that is the moment that ends everything." He set the marker down. "We start tomorrow at 0400. Tonight I suggest you sleep." He picked up his folder and walked out. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Boland leaned over to the candidate sitting next to him and said, loud enough for several people to hear, 3 words on a whiteboard: real inspiring. Nobody laughed that time. Maya lay in her bunk that night and stared at the ceiling and thought about her grandfather. His name was Thomas Carter, and he had served in the Marine Corps as a reconnaissance specialist during a time when that meant something different than it means now, when the tools were simpler and the margin for error was smaller, and the price of being wrong was paid immediately in full without any possibility of a second attempt. He had come home from his service and settled in Montana in the mountains outside a small town called Ingomar. And he had raised his family there, and when Maya's parents divorced and her mother moved back to be closer to him, he had become the most consistent presence in Maya's life from the age of 8 onward. He taught her things slowly. That was the thing people never understood about Thomas Carter. He was not a teacher who explained everything in one sitting. He was a teacher who placed you in a situation and let you figure out what it required, and then afterward talked to you about what you had discovered. When Maya was 10, he took her out into the woods behind his property and told her to sit perfectly still for 1 hour and count how many animals she could detect without moving her head. She saw 3. He told her he had counted 9 while watching her watch the woods. The next week they did it again. She counted 5. The week after that, 7. By the time she was 12, she was consistently seeing more than he was. He never told her she was good at it. He just said, "You're learning to be patient." That's different from being good. Good is temporary. Patient is permanent. She lay in her bunk and heard his voice saying that as clearly as if he were in the room with her. She closed her eyes. She slept. 0400 arrived like a wall. The candidates were roused by an alarm and had 7 minutes to be dressed, geared, and assembled on the grinder, the large concrete area outside the barracks that served as the staging ground for most of the program's early activities. 7 minutes sounds like a long time. It is not a long time. When Maya made it to the grinder, she counted the candidates assembling around her. 14 were present within the 7-minute window. 2 were late by 45 seconds and 60 seconds, respectively. Reynolds was already there, standing with 2 other instructors whose names they had not yet been given. He looked at the 2 late candidates. He didn't yell. He just said, "Go back inside, you're done." The candidate who had been 45 seconds late looked like he had been physically struck. "Senior Chief, we just got here yesterday." "We didn't know the standard." "You knew you had 7 minutes, Reynolds said. "You had 7 minutes in the Marine Corps. You had 7 minutes in the Army. You have 7 minutes here. Go back inside." They went. 14 candidates were left. Maya was one of them. Boland was one of them. Reynolds looked at the remaining 14 and said, "Good, let's go." The first morning was what the program called an orientation evolution, which sounded significantly less difficult than it actually was. They ran 6 miles before the sun came up through terrain that alternated between flat ground and soft sand that grabbed at your feet and made every stride cost twice as much as it should have. They ran in boots. They carried weighted packs. 2 of the instructors ran ahead and 2 ran behind, and nobody was told the route in advance. Maya ran in the middle of the group. She was not the fastest. Boland was the fastest, and he made sure everyone knew it, not by announcing it, but by running at the front and glancing back at regular intervals to check his margin. Patterson was second. A former Marine named Cho was third. Maya was 7th. She stayed 7th for the entire 6 miles, maintaining a pace that was consistent to the point of almost being mechanical. She did not surge. She did not fade. She hit the same rhythm at mile 1 and mile 2 and mile 3 and maintained it all the way to the end. When they stopped, Boland was breathing harder than he looked like he wanted to be. Patterson was bent forward with her hands on her knees. Cho looked composed. Maya's breathing was elevated but controlled. An instructor named Warrant Officer Hatch, who had not spoken a single word during the run, walked over to Maya and stood next to her and watched the rest of the group recover. "You pace yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Maya said. "Why 7th?" he asked. "7th is sustainable for 6 miles," she said. "4th might not be." He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked away without saying anything else. Boland, who had recovered enough to be paying attention to things other than his own breathing, watched that exchange from 12 feet away with an expression that was difficult to read, but that Maya, who had spent her career learning to read expressions, interpreted as something between curiosity and irritation. The run was followed by a navigation exercise. Each candidate was given a map, a compass, and a set of grid coordinates corresponding to 4 checkpoints spread across several miles of varied terrain. They were given 2 hours. They were given no GPS. They were told that failure to reach all 4 checkpoints within the time window constituted an incomplete, and that 3 incompletes meant removal from the program. This was the exercise that claimed 2 more candidates. One of them, a young man named Torres, who had been quiet and competent during the run, got turned around in a section of the terrain where the contour lines on the map were close enough together that reading elevation change required a level of attention he did not quite bring to it. He reached 3 of 4 checkpoints, but missed the 4th by 8 minutes. The other, a candidate, whose name Maya had not yet learned, returned to the starting point after 90 minutes and said he had lost his compass in a ravine and couldn't complete the exercise without it. Reynolds listened to both explanations. He thanked them both for their honesty. He told them both to go back to the barracks and wait for processing. 12 candidates were left. Maya had reached all 4 checkpoints with 19 minutes to spare. She hadn't been the first to finish. Cho finished first. Patterson was second. Maya was 4th. But she had stopped at each checkpoint and spent 90 seconds doing something the other candidates had not bothered to do. She wrote down observations about the terrain at each location: wind direction, sun angle, vegetation density, sight lines in all four cardinal directions. She didn't know if she would need that information. She suspected she might. She was right. 3 days later, Reynolds took the remaining candidates back to the same terrain and told them they would be running an observation exercise using the same ground. Every candidate who had bothered to study the terrain during the navigation exercise had a significant advantage. Every candidate who had treated the navigation exercise as only a navigation exercise was starting from scratch. You collected information during your primary task, Reynolds said, looking at the notes Maya handed him when he asked if anyone had brought supplementary observations from the previous exercise. Yes, Senior Chief. Why, because I didn't know what the next task was going to be, she said. So I collected everything I could while I was there. He read through her notes. He handed them back. He didn't say anything. But something shifted in his expression. Something barely visible. The kind of thing you would only catch if you had learned to read stillness in people the way Maya had spent years learning to read stillness in the Montana wilderness. Approval. Not stated, not performed, just present. Boland noticed Reynolds talking to Maya. He always noticed when Reynolds talked to Maya, and afterward he would find ways to bring it into conversation, usually framed as some variation of the suggestion that Maya was receiving special treatment, that Reynolds was going easier on her, that the standards were being adjusted to make her experience more achievable. 3 days into the program, he said exactly that during lunch. I didn't say it directly to Maya. He said it to Cho, who was sitting 2 seats away from her. I'm just saying, Boland said, the instructors are talking to her differently than they're talking to the rest of us. I've seen it 3 times now. Cho looked at him. Reynolds yelled at me for 4 minutes this morning because my bootlace was uneven. You think he's going easy on anybody? I'm talking about specific attention, Boland said. The kind you give someone when you're trying to make sure they have every advantage. Or, Patterson said from across the table, setting down her fork, the kind you give someone when you're trying to figure out why they're doing things differently than you expected. Boland looked at Patterson. She's doing fine so far, he said. I'll grant you that, fine. But fine at day 3 isn't the same thing as fine at week 6. We haven't gotten to the hard part yet. Maya ate her lunch and said nothing. Later that afternoon, during a stress shooting drill, where candidates were required to fire 5 rounds at a target after completing a short sprint that elevated their heart rates, Maya sat next to Rodriguez during the wait between rotations. Rodriguez was the quiet one, the one who had been lacing his boots when she walked in and had looked at her without judgment and then looked away. She had not spoken to him directly since that first morning. He's going to keep going, Rodriguez said quietly, not looking at her. Maya glanced at him. Boland. He does this, Rodriguez said. I trained with someone exactly like him 8 years ago in a different program. They talk like that because it keeps other people off balance. If you're busy being angry, you're not focused. I know, Maya said. I figured, he said. I just wanted to make sure. She looked at him for a moment. How do you know he does this? Rodriguez finally looked at her. Because he's been doing it to every candidate in this group who he thinks might threaten his position. You're just the loudest target because you're the most visible. She considered that. He's scared, she said. He has no idea that he is, Rodriguez said. But yes. The shooting drill was another moment that lodged itself into the group's understanding of who Maya Carter was. The drill required 5 rounds, center mass on a target at 100 yards within 30 seconds of completing a 200-meter sprint. The sprint was designed to push the heart rate high enough that maintaining a steady aim required active mental control rather than simply pulling a trigger. Most candidates' groups scattered across a 12-inch radius, acceptable within the drill parameters. One candidate, a former Marine named Webb, put 4 rounds in a tight cluster in one slightly high still within the scoring zone. Boland's group was tight, a 4-inch spread. He looked at his target with visible satisfaction and then looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Maya stepped up, completed her sprint, brought the rifle to her shoulder, controlled her breathing for exactly 3 seconds, and fired 5 rounds. 3-inch spread, dead center. Warrant Officer Hatch, who was scoring, looked at the target and wrote something in his notebook. He didn't make an announcement, but Boland saw the target. And for the first time since Maya had arrived, Travis Boland went completely quiet. Not for long, but long enough for several people to notice. That night, Maya lay in her bunk again and stared at the ceiling and heard her grandfather's voice with perfect clarity. She was 16 years old and they were out in the wilderness, and she had just tracked a missing hiker for 3 miles through terrain that had confused the search team. And when they found the man exhausted but alive, huddled under a rock overhang out of the wind, her grandfather had looked at her and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he said, "You understand what you just did." "Found him," she said. "No," he said. "You trusted what you saw when everyone else was trusting what they thought." She hadn't fully understood it then. She was 16 and the man was alive, and that felt like the whole story. But she understood it now. She understood it in the shooting range when everyone else was reacting to their heart rates and she was controlling hers. She understood it in the navigation exercise when she was collecting information that wasn't required by the task but might be required by something she couldn't yet see. She understood it in the barracks when Boland spoke and she said nothing. Because the thing she saw clearly was that nothing she said in that moment was going to matter as much as what she was going to do later. Trust what you see, not what they think. The second week began with something Reynolds called a hide evolution. A hide in sniper terminology is a position from which a shooter can observe and potentially engage targets while remaining completely undetected. Building a hide is one of the most technically demanding and physically exhausting elements of sniper preparation. It requires knowledge of the terrain, understanding of light and shadow patience that most people do not naturally possess, and the ability to remain essentially motionless for periods of time that stretch far beyond anything the human body accepts without protest. Reynolds explained the evolution in exactly 12 sentences. Then he told them they had 4 hours in a 1-mile radius, and the task was to build a hide that his team of evaluators using binoculars and thermal optics could not locate. "We will be actively searching," he said. "If you are found, you are done for the day, and your score reflects it. If you are not found within the 4-hour window, you pass." Questions. Nobody had questions. 12 candidates spread out into the terrain. Maya did not rush. She stood at the edge of the starting point for 4 minutes and watched the terrain, watched the light, watched where the shadows fell, watched where the vegetation was dense enough to conceal but not so different from its surroundings that it would draw an evaluator's eye. An instructor named Petty Officer Garza walked past her as she stood there. "You have 4 hours, Carter," he said. "Yes," she said. "Clock is running," he said. "I know," she said. She did not move. Garza looked at her for a moment and then walked on. 3.5 minutes later, Maya moved. She had a direction. She had a plan. She had identified a section of terrain that met every criterion she had been taught and every instinct she had developed over years of watching, waiting, and understanding how land and light and time work together. She moved slowly, very slowly, the kind of movement that is almost indistinguishable from the terrain shifting in a light breeze. She did not break vegetation. She did not create tracks that differed from the natural patterns of the ground. She took 45 minutes to cover what another candidate would have covered in 8. And then she was still. The evaluators searched for 4 hours. They found 10 of the 12 candidates. The 2 they did not find were Maya Carter and, to a great many people's surprise, Rodriguez. When the evaluation ended and the candidates reassembled, Reynolds looked at the 2 of them for a long moment. "Where were you?" he asked Maya. She pointed to a section of terrain that looked to the naked eye entirely unremarkable. Reynolds walked to where she pointed and stood there and looked down. He was standing 6 inches from where she had been for 3.5 hours. He looked at her. "Your grandfather taught you this," he said. It was not a question. He had been reading her file. "Yes, Senior Chief," she said. "He was Marine Reconnaissance," Reynolds said. "Yes." "He taught you well," Reynolds said. It was 5 words. But in the context of who Reynolds was and how he spoke and what he typically said and didn't say, those 5 words landed with a weight that the entire group felt. Boland, standing at the far edge of the assembled candidates, heard them. He had been found in the first hour. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. And Maya, who noticed everything, noticed that too. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt the same thing she always felt when something she had prepared for worked the way she had prepared for it to work. Confirmation. Confirmation, not of superiority, not of victory. Just confirmation that the path her grandfather had set her on, that long and slow and patient path through Montana mornings and wilderness evenings and decades of learning to see what other people overlooked, that path was exactly the right one, that it had led her here, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 more days passed. They were harder days than the first week. The evolutions grew longer, the standards tighter, the physical demand higher. 2 more candidates left, one voluntarily, one after an injury to his ankle during a long march that Reynolds assessed and determined was too severe to continue safely. 10 candidates remained. The group had shifted, not dramatically, not with any single event that everyone could point to as the moment things changed, but shifted the way water shifts when you remove something from a container, gradually naturally adjusting to a new distribution. People had stopped laughing, not just at Maya, at everything. Because they were tired, and exhaustion has a way of stripping away the things people use to fill space when they're not paying full attention. And what you find underneath when the exhaustion removes all of that is usually the truth of who someone is. The truth of Travis Boland, stripped of his bravado and his audience and his surplus of energy, was that he was a genuinely skilled candidate who was also deeply afraid of not being the best. That fear drove him. It had always driven him, and it had gotten him far. But it was also the thing that made him loud when he should have been quiet and aggressive, when he should have been patient and visible, when he absolutely, in the context of what they were training for, needed to be invisible. The truth of Maya Carter, stripped of everything she had been told about herself by people who had looked at her and made decisions before they had any information, was that she was the most prepared person in that room. Not the most athletic, not the most aggressive, the most prepared. And preparation, as Senior Chief Reynolds had been trying to show all of them since the first morning, was the only thing that actually mattered when the terrain was wrong and the weather was wrong and everything that could go sideways was going sideways. On the morning of day 11, Reynolds gathered the remaining 10 candidates and told them the program was entering what he called Phase 2. What you've done so far, he said, has been about establishing a baseline. We needed to know what each of you brings and what each of you is missing. Phase 2 is about pressure. He looked around the group. Phase 2 is where most people leave, he said. Nobody spoke. Phase 2 starts now, he said, and he handed them their next set of orders. Maya read hers. She read them once. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. And somewhere behind her eyes, in that still and quiet place where her grandfather's voice lived, in the Montana wilderness lived, and every hour she had ever spent learning to be patient, lived something settled into place with a certainty that felt less like confidence and more like inevitability. She was ready. Part 2 continues the story of Maya Carter in Phase 2 of training, where the pressure intensifies new alliances, form old enemies, show their true nature in the woman. Nobody expected reveals just how deep her preparation goes. Part 2, the weight of Phase 2. Phase 2 began on a Thursday. Reynolds didn't ease them into it. He dropped them into it the way you drop something heavy from a height, without warning, without ceremony, with nothing but the sound of impact. The orders Maya had folded into her pocket that morning contained a single directive, a 48-hour continuous field evolution that combined navigation, observation, concealment, and what the program called stress decision-making. A deliberately vague term that, as Maya and the 9 remaining candidates would discover, meant exactly what it sounded like. Decisions made under conditions specifically designed to make clear thinking as difficult as possible. They started before dawn. Each candidate was given a separate insertion point, separate objectives, separate routes. They would operate individually for the first 24 hours and then converge at a designated coordination point where they would shift to a paired evolution for the second half. The pairing was not random. Reynolds announced the pairs at the insertion point, standing in the gray pre-dawn light, with his hands clasped behind his back and his voice flat and direct the way it always was. He paired Maya with Boland. Nobody spoke when he said it, but the silence said everything. Maya glanced at Boland. Boland looked straight ahead, jaw-set expression, controlled in the way someone controls their expression when they are actively working to keep something from showing on their face. She looked away. Reynolds continued with the other pairings, Patterson with Cho Rodriguez, with a candidate named Fierro, and the remaining 2 together, and then he sent them out. 24 hours solo, he said, then the coordination point, then 24 hours together. Sleep when you can, move when you must, don't make mistakes. He walked back to his vehicle. They scattered into the terrain. Maya's first 24 hours were in the language of performance clean. She moved to her first objective through a section of terrain that climbed steeply before flattening into a long ridge, and she moved it the way she moved everything steadily without wasted motion, reading the ground as she went. Her first objective was a cache point where she was required to retrieve a sealed container and record the alphanumeric code printed inside. Simple enough. The terrain around the cache, however, had been deliberately altered to present a series of decision points areas where the most direct route was also the most exposed route, and where the safer route was longer, slower, and required significantly more energy. She took the safer route every time. She reached the cache 4 minutes inside the time window, retrieved the code, and moved on to the second objective. By hour 12, she had completed 3 of her 4 solo objectives. By hour 18, she had completed all 4 and was in a concealed position above the coordination point waiting. She was the first to arrive. She stayed in her hide and watched the terrain below and listened to the wind and waited the same way she had waited in the Montana mountains as a child, with the kind of patience that most adults have to learn and that she had learned so early it felt like breathing. Rodriguez arrived next at hour 21. He came in from the eastern approach, moving carefully, and when he reached the coordination point, he scanned his surroundings before settling in, and Maya recognized the pattern of a trained observer doing what trained observers do automatically. She stayed in her hide until hour 23, when she moved down to the coordination point. Rodriguez looked at her when she appeared. "How long were you up there?" he asked. "A while," she said. He shook his head slightly. "I scanned that ridge twice." "I know," she said. "I watched you." He looked at her for a moment, and then something that was almost a smile crossed his face. Not quite, but almost. Boland arrived at hour 23 and 40 minutes, which was inside the window, but later than Maya had expected. And when he arrived, he was moving faster than he should have been for a man who had been operational for nearly a full day, which told her he had either pushed himself harder than necessary at some point or run into a problem he'd had to work around. He looked at Maya, he looked at Rodriguez. He set his gear down. "Carter," he said. "Boland," she said. That was the entirety of their greeting. Patterson and Cho arrived 8 minutes later. Fierro and the remaining pair came in just before the window closed, Fierro favoring his left leg slightly in a way that he was clearly trying not to let show. All 10 candidates had made it through the first 24 hours. Reynolds appeared at the coordination point at hour 24 exactly as if he had been standing just out of sight the entire time, which several candidates suspected was not entirely inaccurate. He looked at each of them. He said nothing about performance. He said nothing about who had arrived when. He simply said, "Pair up. You have 20 minutes to rest, eat, and receive your Phase 2 objectives. Then you go back out. Together. 20 minutes. Maya ate a protein bar and drank half her water and spent the remaining 14 minutes sitting with her back against a tree and doing something that looked to anyone watching like resting. What she was actually doing was thinking about Boland, not strategically, not resentfully. Just thinking about him the way she thought about any unknown variable she was about to spend 24 hours operating beside. What were his strengths? What were his gaps? Where was his discipline solid and where did it fracture under pressure? She had been watching him for 11 days. She had learned things. Boland's strengths were real. He was physically capable in a way that was not common. He had excellent spatial awareness in open terrain. She had watched him during the navigation exercises, and he read open ground the way instinctive navigators do without needing to constantly reference his map. He made fast decisions. Under pressure, he moved. His gaps were just as real. He moved when he should have been still. He decided when he should have waited. He wanted to be seen performing competently more than he wanted to actually perform competently, and that distinction in visible and easy conditions became a liability. The moment conditions became difficult. She understood him now. That understanding made her less afraid of the next 24 hours. Reynolds handed her the paired objective sheet. She read it, and she understood why he had paired her with Boland. The paired evolution was not a cooperation exercise. It was a leadership pressure test. The objectives were designed in a way that required 2 people to work in coordination, and the design of the specific task assigned to each pair was calibrated to create natural friction. Task 1 required patience and stillness. Task 2 required speed and aggression. Task 3 required one person to lead and one person to follow, and the sheet did not specify who did which. It was designed to force a negotiation between two people who the program clearly understood had been on opposite ends of a conflict since the first morning. She folded the sheet. She walked to where Boland was standing reading his own copy of the objectives. "I've read the sheet," she said. "So have I," he said, not looking up. "Then you understand what they're testing," she said. He looked up now. "I understand what the objectives are." "The objectives aren't what they're testing," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "You think you know what they're testing?" "I think they want to see if we can function together under pressure when we have documented friction," she said. "And I think the way we function will tell them more about both of us than anything we've done individually." He was quiet for a moment. "You're saying we need to work together," he said. "I'm saying that working against each other on this evolution will cost both of us," she said. "And I'm saying that I would rather do this right than win an argument." Boland looked at her. She could see him processing, could see the resistance and the calculation and the part of him that wanted to push back simply because she had said something first. And the other part of him, the part that had gotten him this far, that was actually listening. "Fine," he said, "but I'm running point on task 2. Task 2 needs speed," she said. "You run point on task 2. And task 1?" She looked at him steadily. "Task 1 needs patience," she said. He understood what she was saying. "I can be patient," he said. "I know you can," she said, and she meant it. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, not a transformation, just a small adjustment, the kind that happens when someone says something they weren't expecting, and it lands somewhere they didn't have a defense prepared. They went back out into the terrain. Task 1. Task 1 required them to establish a concealed observation position with clear sight lines to a designated target area and remain undetected for 90 minutes while recording activity at the target. The target was a simulated position staffed by 2 instructors whose job was to move around naturally and detect any candidates who revealed themselves through movement, sound, or poor concealment. They found their position together. Maya had a location in mind within 10 minutes of entering the terrain, and she explained her reasoning to Boland as they moved the shadow angle. The vegetation covered the distance that gave them observation without the thermal signature that would register on the evaluator's equipment at close range. Boland listened. He didn't offer an alternative, which told Maya that he understood her reasoning was sound and that somewhere behind the bravado was a man who could actually evaluate information objectively when the conditions required it. They settled into the position. 90 minutes. Boland lasted 40 minutes before he shifted his weight. Not dramatically, a small adjustment, 2 inches. The kind of movement that the human body produces automatically when it has been holding a position long enough that staying still requires active effort rather than passive maintenance. Maya's hand found his arm instantly. Light pressure, a signal. He went still. He stayed still. 50 more minutes. When the evolution ended and the evaluators swept the area, they did not find Maya in Boland's position. When they reassembled, one of the evaluators, a chief petty officer named Akins, who had been running the target area, walked directly to Maya and said, "Your position selection was textbook. Whose call was that?" "Mine," Maya said. Akins nodded. Boland said nothing. But later, as they moved toward task 2, Boland said quietly, not looking at her, "Good call on the position." She didn't make a thing of it. "Thanks," she said. "I mean it," he said. "I know," she said. "Let's run." Task 2 was Boland's domain. It required them to move 1,200 meters across open terrain within a tight time window while carrying a load that simulated a casualty extraction scenario, a weighted dummy that had to be transported while maintaining enough speed to reach the extraction point before the window closed. The dummy weighed 210 pounds. Boland took the primary carry position without discussion and without making a production of it. He simply moved into position, got his hands under the load, nodded at Maya, and started moving. She took the secondary position. They moved. This was Boland at his best, physical focused, operating in a mode where his instinct to push was exactly the right instinct. He set a pace that was at the edge of sustainable and held it, and Maya matched him, stride for stride, and they didn't talk because they didn't need to. 900 meters and Boland's right knee buckled slightly on a downhill step. Not a fall, Not a stop, just a slight give, the kind of thing that happens when a joint has been under load long enough, and he corrected immediately and kept moving. But Maya felt it through the weight they were sharing. 300 meters, she said. I know, he said. Pace is good, she said. I know, he said again, and his voice had something in it she had not heard before. Strain, real strain, not the performed effort she had seen him display in situations where the effort was manageable. This was actual physical limitation, pressing against a man who had built his entire identity around never being limited. Don't slow down, she said. I'm not slowing down, he said. Good, she said, because I need you to get me there. She said it deliberately. I need you. Not you can do it, not push through, not any of the things a person says when they are trying to encourage someone from a position of superiority. I need you to get me there. She said it because it was true, because she could not move this weight to the extraction point in time without him, and because she understood that Travis Boland had been running his entire career on the fuel of needing to be needed, and she was simply telling him the truth. He didn't slow down. He sped up. Not by much, maybe 3%, maybe less, but they reached the extraction point with 42 seconds to spare. Boland set the dummy down and stood with his hands on his knees, breathing in the deep, controlled way of someone who has taken their body to its limit and is now methodically bringing it back. Maya stood beside him. Good run, she said. He looked up at her from his bent position, and for a moment, just a moment, the expression on his face was something she had never seen from him before. It wasn't gratitude exactly, it was something closer to recognition, like he was seeing for the first time since she had walked into that barracks, not an intrusion or a complication or a political statement, but a person, a partner, someone who had just asked him for something real and meant it. He straightened up. You set that up, he said, the thing you said at the end. Did it work? She said. He looked at her. Yeah, he said, it worked. She nodded once. Then it was the right call, she said. Task 3 arrived the next morning at hour 36 of the 48-hour evolution, which meant both of them were running on fractured sleep and the particular kind of mental fatigue that makes everything feel slightly slower than it actually is. Task 3 was a precision engagement exercise. Simulated targets at variable distances under variable conditions. Wind, elevation change, a time component that added pressure without making accuracy optional. The sheet didn't specify who led. They stood at the start point and looked at it. You lead this one, Boland said. Maya looked at him. Why, she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. Because I watched you on the range 10 days ago, he said, and I watched you in the hide yesterday, and I'm not an idiot. She held his gaze. I'll lead the engagement sequence, she said. You run the spotting. Deal, he said. A spotter in a sniper team is not a secondary role. A spotter who doesn't know what they're doing can make every other element of the engagement irrelevant. A spotter who does know what they're doing is half the team in every meaningful sense. Boland turned out to be a very good spotter. He read the wind with a directness and a confidence that surprised her. Not the bravado of a man performing competence, but the real thing grounded in genuine spatial intelligence and physical awareness. He called the wind shifts before she needed them. He tracked the targets efficiently. He communicated clearly without excess. They moved through the exercise together like two people who had been working together for years. The evaluator to watching them. Warrant Officer Hatch wrote steadily in his notebook throughout. At the end of the engagement sequence, when the evolution officially closed and they were making their way back to the main facility, Boland walked beside Maya without the distance he had been maintaining since the first morning. Not close, not warm exactly, but present. I said some things in the barracks that were out of line, he said. Maya walked. I know you did, she said. I'm not, he started and then stopped, which was itself unusual because Boland always finished his sentences. I'm not good at being uncertain, he said. Nobody is, she said. You seem like you are, he said. I've just had more practice accepting it, she said. I grew up being uncertain about everything, about whether I was reading the terrain right, about whether I'd find the track, about whether the information I had was complete. You learn to work inside uncertainty because the alternative is paralysis. Boland walked for a moment without speaking. My instructor in Ranger School told me uncertainty was a weakness, he said. Your instructor was wrong, Maya said. He was quiet again. Yeah, he said, I'm starting to think so. They reached the facility as the last light of the day was dropping behind the hills, and Reynolds was there waiting. The way Reynolds always seemed to be there waiting, and he looked at each of the 5 pairs in turn, with the expression that told you absolutely nothing and everything simultaneously. Debrief at 0700, he said. Sleep. They slept. The debrief of the next morning was 45 minutes and involved Reynolds and 2 other senior evaluators sitting at a table while each pair was brought in separately to review their objective performance. Maya and Boland went last. Reynolds looked at their scores. He looked at them. He said, Task 1 was clean. Task 2 was close, 42 seconds inside the window. Task 3 was the strongest paired engagement I've seen in this program in 3 years. He looked at Maya specifically. You made a leadership decision on Task 3, he said. We made a shared decision, she said. Reynolds looked at Boland. Boland said, she led the engagement. I spotted. It was the right call given what we each bring. Reynolds said nothing for a moment. Then he said, that is the correct answer. He closed the folder. You both passed phase 2, he said. They walked out of the debrief room and stood in the corridor. Boland extended his hand. Maya looked at it for a second. Then she shook it. Don't go soft on me, Boland, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Not a chance, he said, but the handshake lasted a full 2 seconds, and when he walked away, he walked differently than he had for the past 2 weeks. Not softer, not easier, but without the performance of it, without the constant announcement of himself. Just a man walking, just a soldier moving to the next thing. The days after phase 2 moved differently. The group of 10 had become through 48 hours of shared exhaustion and genuine pressure, something more cohesive than a collection of competing individuals. Not friends necessarily, not unified in any soft or comfortable sense, but a unit, people who had been tested beside each other and had seen in the unfiltered clarity that comes from real operational stress who each person actually was. Patterson had emerged as the most technically precise shooter in the group. Her shot groups were consistently the tightest, her range discipline impeccable. Cho was the strongest navigator moving through any terrain with a naturalness that the instructors noted repeatedly. Rodriguez was the group's quietest and most complete operator. There was almost nothing he did badly and several things he did better than anyone else in the room. And Maya. Maya had become the person Reynolds used as an example. Not loudly, not with announcement, just quietly, consistently, in the way that matters most in a program like this, when an instructor needed to show a candidate what a thing was supposed to look like. He pointed at Maya. Carter's hide selection, Reynolds said during one range evolution. Look at how she's using the terrain. Not hiding behind it, using it. There's a difference. The candidate he was talking to looked. I don't see her, the candidate said. That Reynolds said is the point. Boland, standing 10 feet away, heard that exchange. He didn't say anything, but he was listening. The atmosphere in the barracks had changed. The laughter of the first morning was something that nobody discussed anymore, not because it was a sensitive subject, but because it had simply become irrelevant. It was the artifact of a version of this group that no longer existed. But the change in Boland was the one that people noticed. He still competed. He still pushed. He still had the intensity that had gotten him through Ranger selection and into this program. But the edge that had been aimed outward, specifically at Maya, had redirected itself. He used it on the evolutions, on the range, on his own performance. On an evening 3 days after the phase 2 debrief, Maya was cleaning her equipment in the barracks when Boland sat down on his bunk 2 bunks down from her and said without preamble, "How did you know I was scared?" She looked up from what she was doing. "You said I was scared," he said. "On the second day, Rodriguez told me." She considered whether to answer directly. She decided yes. "Because scared people are the loudest ones," she said. "Confident people don't need to announce themselves. You were announcing yourself constantly." He sat with that. "I didn't know I was doing it," he said. "I know," she said. "That's worse," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's better because now you know." He was quiet. "My father was special forces," he said. "He told me you show weakness once in an environment like this and you never get it back." "Your father was wrong about that too," she said. He looked at her. "He was right about a lot of things," he said. And there was something complicated in his voice when he said it. Not defense, not agreement, just the specific complexity of someone navigating the truth about a person they love. I believe that, Maya said. I'm just saying he was wrong about that part. Boland was quiet for a long time. My grandfather was the same way, she said. Tough, certain, never wasted a word on something he didn't mean. He taught me everything I know about this work. She paused. But he was wrong about some things, too. He thought women couldn't read terrain as well as men. He never said it directly, but it was there in the way he explained things to me when I was small, the extra patience in his voice, like he was compensating for something he assumed was missing. Boland was watching her. When did you realize he was wrong? He said. When I was 14, she said. He lost a track in the snow and I found it, and he stood there for about 30 seconds, looking at my face like he was seeing something for the first time. She paused. He never added the extra patience after that. Boland was quiet. What did he say? He asked. Nothing, she said. He just started walking again. That's it. That was everything, she said. From him, that was everything. Boland looked at the floor. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not... He stopped. Not the kind where I explain why I said what I said. Just, I was wrong. Maya looked at him steadily. I know, she said. That's all you're going to say, he said. That's all I needed from you, she said. Now we move forward. He nodded. And they did. Phase 3 was announced on a Monday morning, 15 days after the program began. 6 of the original 16 candidates had left. 10 remained. Phase 3, Reynolds explained, would be the final preparation block before the evaluation evolution, the comprehensive test that would determine who completed the program. Phase 3 focuses on what happens when everything you know fails, he said. Equipment failure, weather failure, partner failure, your own physical failure. We will deliberately compromise your confidence in your tools and your conditions. The question we are answering is whether you have internalized the fundamentals deeply enough to perform without the assistance of ideal circumstances. He looked around the group. Because in real operations, he said, circumstances are never ideal. He paused. Phase 3 begins at 0400 tomorrow. Get your rest. That night, Maya sat on her bunk and wrote in the small notebook she had been keeping since the first day, not a journal, not personal reflections, just operational notes. Observations, patterns, things she had noticed that might be useful. She had 11 pages. She read through them slowly. There was an entry from day 3 about the wind patterns in the training terrain, how the direction shifted predictably in the late afternoon when the land heated and then cooled. There was an entry from the Hyde evolution about a specific type of vegetation that cast irregular shadows that made an observer's eye slide over rather than stop. There was an entry about Boland, not negative, just observational, noting the moments when his performance peaked and the moments when it fractured. She turned to a blank page, and she wrote down the one thing her grandfather had told her that she had not written anywhere yet, because she had not needed to write it down because it had been inside her since she was 16 years old, standing in the snow watching him realize he had been wrong about her. She wrote, anyone can learn the skill. Only some people learn the terrain. She underlined it. She closed the notebook. Tomorrow, phase 3. She was ready. What none of them knew, what Maya did not know, what Boland did not know, what even Reynolds gave no indication of knowing, in the way he held his expression, in those flat, unreadable lines, was that phase 3 would not test them the way they expected. Phase 3 would test them in the one place none of them had been preparing. Not the body, not the mind, each other. And the fractures that phase 3 would expose were not the ones anyone saw coming. Part 3, the fracture lines. Phase 3 began the way Reynolds had promised it would not, with a briefing, not with a schedule, not with anything that gave the remaining 10 candidates a framework to hang their expectations on. It began with silence. 0400, the alarm sounded. Maya was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk with her boots on, notebook closed on the bed beside her. She had slept 4 hours and she had felt every one of them the way you feel sleep when your body has been pushed far enough that rest stops being a comfort and starts being a biological negotiation. She was in the corridor before the last echo of the alarm had settled. Boland was 30 seconds behind her. Then Patterson, then Cho, then Rodriguez, who arrived looking entirely composed in the way that was beginning to seem less like calm and more like a very specific kind of discipline. They assembled on the grinder. Reynolds was there. So were three instructors Maya had not seen before. Not from the program, not from the facility. Men who carry themselves with a quality that she recognized immediately, the particular stillness of people who have operated in real conditions for long enough that performance had been replaced entirely by function. Reynolds looked at the group. Phase 3, he said. No objective sheet, no time windows, no map. He let that land. Boland's head turned slightly, just slightly, but Maya caught it. You have your equipment, Reynolds said. You have each other, and you have this. He held up a single sheet of paper. One coordinate, one location. Your job is to get there, establish an observation post, and maintain it for 72 hours. 72 hours. Patterson said not as a question, just as a fact that needed to be acknowledged out loud. 72 hours, Reynolds confirmed. You will be observed. You will be evaluated. The criteria for evaluation will not be shared with you in advance. Everything you do, every decision, every interaction, every mistake is being assessed. He paused. This is not an individual evolution. This is a team evolution. You will succeed together or you will fail together. He handed the coordinate sheet to Cho, who was standing closest. Then he and the three instructors walked away. Just like that, 10 people standing in the dark on a grinder with one coordinate in 72 hours in front of them and nothing else. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody said anything. Then Boland said, "We need a plan." "We need a leader," Patterson said. "Same thing," Boland said. "No," Rodriguez said quietly from the edge of the group. "It's not." Everyone looked at him. Rodriguez almost never spoke first in a group setting. That was well established by now. When he spoke, people listened because he had established over 15 days of performance that he didn't use words carelessly. "A plan without leadership is a list," he said. "We need someone to call the shots when the plan breaks down. Because it will break down." Silence. Then Boland looked at Maya. It surprised her. She didn't let it show. "Carter," he said, "you lead the observation post selection and the concealment setup. That's what you do better than anyone here." Patterson looked at Boland, then at Maya. "I can run navigation," Patterson said, "getting us there." "Cho runs navigation," Maya said, making the decision cleanly without hesitation. "You and I run point on the OP setup. Rodriguez, I want you running comms and observation logging. Fierro Webb, you're on perimeter." She looked around the group. Nobody argued. That alone said something. They moved out before the first gray light had fully separated itself from the dark, and they moved as a unit in a way that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had watched them on day one. Not perfect, not without friction, but functional, organized, moving with the shared economy of people who have learned to trust each other's specific competencies. Cho navigated. I was extraordinary at it. He had a way of reading the land without constantly referencing the map, checking it only when necessary, moving through terrain. The way water moves, choosing the path of least resistance without making it look like a choice. They reached the general area of the coordinate at hour 2. Maya stopped the group before they entered the final approach. "We don't walk straight in," she said. "It's the fastest route," Fierro said. "It's also where they'll be watching for us," Maya said. "The coordinate is a destination. They know our destination. They don't know our approach." She looked at the group. "We go wide," she said. "Eastern arc adds 40 minutes. 40 minutes is," Fierro started. 40 minutes is not 72 hours, Maya said. "We spend 40 minutes doing this right, or we spend 72 hours compromised. Choose." Fierro looked at the ground. "Eastern arc," he said. They went wide. The OP site Maya selected was not the most comfortable location, and it was not the most direct. It was the location that met every criterion she had developed over 2 weeks of training and 20 years of her grandfather's teaching: the right shadows, the right sight, lines, the right balance between concealment and observation coverage. She spent 11 minutes walking the area before she committed to it. Patterson watched her move through the area. "You're reading something I'm not seeing," Patterson said. "Tell me what you see," Maya said. Patterson looked. "Cover, elevation advantage. Approach from 3 directions covered." "What's the 4th direction?" Maya said. Patterson turned, looked. "That ridge," she said slowly. "If they run thermal from that ridge..." "We're exposed on the eastern face," Maya said. "So we angle the position." She pointed. "Here, not there." Patterson looked at where she was pointing. The sight line to the target area is narrower from there, Patterson said. 8 degrees narrower, Maya said. But we're invisible on all 4 axes. Patterson considered it. 8 degrees is significant, she said. Being found in the first hour is more significant, Maya said. Patterson nodded. Here, she said, they built the OP. Hour 4. The group had found a rhythm. Assignments were clear. Rodriguez had his observation log running. Perimeter was established. Boland was running a secondary observation arc that extended the team's coverage without compromising the primary position. This was where Maya noticed the first fracture. Fierro and Webb had been quiet since the movement phase, not the focused quiet of people working. The tense quiet of people who had something unresolved between them. She had noticed it during the march, the specific distance they maintained from each other that was slightly more than operational and slightly less than obvious. She filed it. Hour 6, the first test. Reynolds had promised they would be observed. He had not specified how. The answer arrived at hour 6 in the form of a small drone, not military spec, not silent, just a civilian-grade surveillance platform running a search pattern above their general area. Webb saw it first. Drone, he said, too loud. 3 people looked up. Looking up at a drone from a concealed position is the single fastest way to reveal a concealed position. Eyes down, Maya said, sharp and immediate. Everyone eyes down and don't move. A beat of stillness. The drone passed over, continued its pattern, moved on. Maya counted 30 seconds after it disappeared before she allowed anyone to shift position. She looked at Webb. He looked at the ground. Sorry, he said. It's done, and she said. Next time, sound only. No visual confirmation. Understood. Around the group, quiet acknowledgments. But Fierro, sitting 6 feet from Webb, said nothing. Just looked at him with an expression that had something in it beyond the irritation of a tactical mistake. Maya registered it, filed it again. Hour 9. The fracture opened. It started with a small thing. The worst fractures always do. Fierro had been assigned a specific observation window, a 2-hour block of logging activity at the target area. At the end of his window, he passed the log to Webb, who was on the next block. 20 minutes into Webb's block, Fierro said quietly, "You're logging the timing wrong." Webb looked at the log. "I'm logging what I see when I see it." "You're off by consistent intervals," Fierro said. "Every entry is slightly delayed. You're logging after you've processed, not when you observe." "That's the same thing," Webb said. "It's not the same thing," Fierro said. And there was an edge in his voice that had nothing to do with logging protocol. Fierro, Rodriguez said, not looking up from his own notes. "The logging is fine." "It's not fine," Fierro said. "Delayed logging creates false timestamps in the intelligence product," and Fierro, Maya's voice, flat, not loud. He stopped. "Walk with me," she said. They moved 10 meters from the group, far enough for a private conversation, close enough to maintain the position. "Talk," she said. "The logging is not what this is about," she said. "Try again." Fierro was quiet for a moment. "He got my position in phase 2, Fierro said. "He made a recommendation to Reynolds about how I was moving that Reynolds used to evaluate my phase 2 score." Maya looked at him. "He gave feedback to the instructors about a teammate. He said he was being accurate," Fierro said. "He said it was the kind of information that matters." "Was he right," Maya said, "about how you were moving?" Fierro's jaw tightened. "He was right," he said, "but that's not." "Yes, it is," Maya said. "That's exactly what that is." Fierro looked at her. "He was doing his job," Maya said. "He saw something that affected the team's performance and he reported it. That is the job. You know that." "He could have told me first," Fierro said, and the rawness in his voice was suddenly much more present. Not anger, something closer to hurt. "Maybe he should have," Maya said. "That's a fair thing to feel. But right now, at this moment, we are 17 hours from the halfway point of a 72-hour evolution, and you are fracturing the team over something that happened in a previous phase." Fierro said nothing. "Reynolds told us on the first day that phase 3 tests whether we can function together under pressure," Maya said. "This is the pressure he was talking about, not the drone, not the terrain, this. Whether you can sit 6 feet from Webb for 50 more hours and do your job at full capacity." Fierro breathed. "Can you?" she said, a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Then we go back," she said. They went back. Webb looked at Fierro when they returned. Fierro looked at Webb. Your logging is fine, Fierro said. Flat, not warm, but direct. Webb nodded, and it wasn't resolved, it wasn't healed, but it was functional. And functional in this context was all that was required. Hour 12, twist. Reynolds appeared, not with a vehicle, not with the other evaluators, just Reynolds alone walking into the position from the northern approach, with his hands in his pockets and his expression carrying exactly the same amount of information it had always carried, which was none. He looked at the OP, he looked at the group. He said, I need 3 candidates at the secondary evaluation point in 30 minutes. The other 7 stay on the OP. He read 3 names from a card: Patterson, Cho, Maya. The 3 best performers in the current group by every measure Reynolds had used. He said nothing else. He walked back out. The remaining 7 looked at each other. Boland looked at Maya. What is that? He said. I don't know, she said. And it was the truth. You think it's an individual assessment, Patterson said. I think we don't have enough information to answer that question, Rodriguez said. Maya looked at the group, at Boland specifically. You will run this position while we're gone, she said. Same structure, same assignments. Nothing changes. How long will you be? Boland said. I don't know, she said again. Something moved across Boland's face, not uncertainty exactly, but the specific discomfort of a man who had recently learned to operate in shared leadership and was now being asked to operate alone. I've got it, he said. She held his gaze for a second. I know you do, she said. She and Patterson and Cho moved out. The secondary evaluation point was a kilometer away. And when they arrived, the 3 unfamiliar instructors from the morning briefing were there, standing, waiting, with the same quality of stillness that had registered immediately when Maya first saw them. No Reynolds. One of the instructors stepped forward. He said his name was Commander Lind. He said they had 20 minutes. He said what happened in those 20 minutes was classified within the program and not to be discussed with the other candidates. Then he told them what the secondary evaluation actually was. It was not a skill test, it was a selection decision. 3 slots had opened in an advanced follow-on program, a program above the current one, a program that only existed for candidates who had demonstrated a specific combination of technical skill and leadership capacity that the instructors had been quietly tracking since day 1. 3 slots, 3 candidates called. The math was not subtle. We need your decisions by the end of this conversation, Commander Lin said. Yes or no? If yes, you leave this evolution now and begin the new program in 48 hours. Your current program result transfers as a completion. If no, you return to your OP and finish the 72 hours. Patterson said yes before he had finished the sentence. Cho took 4 seconds, then said yes. They both looked at Maya. Maya said nothing. Commander Lin looked at her. Carter. She was looking at the ground between her feet. In her head, very clearly, she could hear her grandfather's voice, not advice, just his voice, the texture of it, the way it sounded when he was waiting for her to work something out herself, because he already knew she could. 3 slots, 3 people called. If she said yes, she left the evolution. She left Boland running an OP with 6 other people, one of whom had a fracture with a teammate that was functional, but not resolved in the middle of the most demanding evolution of the program. She left a team that she had built partially through her own decisions and her own leadership. She left them. If she said no, she passed on an opportunity that might not come again. She stayed. She thought about what Reynolds had said on day 1. Patience, observation, precision. She thought about what her grandfather had said, anyone can learn the skill. Only some people learn the terrain. She thought about Boland's face when she said, I need you to get me there. She looked up. No, she said. Commander Lin looked at her without expression. Confirm, he said. No, she said again. I'm going back to my OP. Patterson looked at her, genuinely surprised. Maya. You should go, Maya said. Both of you. That's a good opportunity. Take it. You're giving up. I'm not giving up anything, Maya said. I made a commitment to that position. There are 7 people there who are depending on the team structure we built. I'm not pulling out of that at hour 12 of 72 because a better offer showed up. She looked at Commander Lin. Is there anything else? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, no, you're free to return. She turned and walked back toward the OP. Behind her, she heard Commander Lin say very quietly to someone beside him, something she wasn't meant to hear. She heard it anyway. He said, there it is. She didn't break stride. When she walked back into the OP position, Boland saw her face before she said anything and read it the way he had learned to read her, not perfectly, but better than he had 2 weeks ago. Patterson and Cho aren't coming back, he said. No, she said. Advanced selection, he said. Not a question. Yes. They offered it to you, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. He held her gaze. You said no, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Why, he said. She sat down in her position, picked up her observation notebook. Because I told these 7 people they could count on me, she said. And that's not a small thing. Boland was quiet for a long time. Then he said very quietly, no, it's not. He went back to his position. The group absorbed the absence of Patterson and Cho in the way groups absorb sudden changes, a moment of structural uncertainty, followed by a rapid recalibration. 8 people now, instead of 10. Assignments redistributed, coverage adapted. It worked because the structure was sound, because Maya had built it carefully. Hour 24, halfway. The night was cold, and the group was tired, and someone Webb had developed a friction blister on his left heel that he had been managing in silence for 6 hours, and that Maya noticed only because she noticed everything. Get that treated, she said. It's fine, he said. It will be fine when you treat it, she said. It will become a problem if you don't. We have 36 more hours. He treated it. An hour later in the dark, Boland moved to sit near Maya during a watch rotation. When I came into this program, he said quietly, I had a plan. I had a very specific plan about how I was going to perform and what the outcome was going to be and what it was going to bring. And now, she said, now I think the plan was mostly about my ego, he said. And I think ego is the worst possible navigation tool in an environment like this. Maya thought about that. Ego is useful, she said. It gets you to the starting line. The problem is when people think the starting line is the destination. He was quiet. Your grandfather taught you that, he said. My grandfather showed me it by example, she said. He was the most capable person I ever knew, and he was the most uncertain person I ever knew. Those 2 things weren't in conflict. One was the reason for the other. Boland let out a long, slow breath. I've never operated without certainty, he said. You operated without it for the last 36 hours, she said. He stopped, realized she was right. Yeah, he said, slowly. I did. And you were good, she said. He said nothing. She said nothing. They watched the dark terrain together in silence for a long time. And the silence was the easy kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that 2 people can only reach after they have moved through enough difficulty together that the need for performance has been replaced by something more honest. Hour 48, Reynolds came back. This time with the full evaluator team. They swept the position. They reviewed Rodriguez's observation logs. They evaluated the OP structure. They assessed the perimeter integrity. They checked every element of what 8 people had built and maintained for 2 full days. It took 40 minutes. When they were done, Reynolds stood in front of the group and said exactly 4 words. This is the standard. He didn't say who had said it. He didn't need to. Everyone in the group knew. And everyone in the group, including Boland, including Fierro and Webb, who had rebuilt something broken, including Rodriguez, who had been quietly excellent throughout, looked at Maya Carter in the same moment. She was looking at her notebook, writing something down, because there was still 24 hours to go, and she never stopped doing the work just because someone told her it was good. Hour 51. The final test arrived in a form nobody expected. The drone came back. Not 1 drone this time. 3, running a coordinated pattern that covered the entire OP area with overlapping search sweeps that left no dead zone, no gap, no angle from which the position was not being observed simultaneously. The group had 6 minutes before the pattern would converge directly overhead. Maya made the call in 4 seconds. We don't move the position, she said. We go deeper into it. Everyone press into your cover and do not move until I say. If they have thermal, Fierro started. They have thermal, she said, so we minimize our profile. Down, slower breathing, everyone. Boland looked at her. You sure, he said. The alternative is movement, she said. Movement in a coordinated drone pattern is an automatic detection. Stillness at least gives us a chance. 1 second. Down, he said to the group. They went down. Stillness. complete stillness. Maya's heart was running, but her breathing was controlled, and her body was exactly where it needed to be, and she counted seconds in her head the way she had learned to count seconds as a 16-year-old in Montana, when everything depended on not moving before the moment was right. The drones passed. The pattern continued. Moved on. Silence returned. 20 seconds of nobody breathing properly. Then Rodriguez said quietly, "Clear." The group let out 8 simultaneous exhales. Boland looked at Maya. She was already writing in her notebook. "How did you know moving was the wrong call?" he said. "I didn't know," she said without looking up. "But I understood the terrain, and I trusted what I understood." She paused. "My grandfather's rule," she said. "When you have to choose between what you know and what you feel, choose what you know, every time." Boland looked at her. "What if what you know is wrong?" he said. She finally looked up. "Then you were wrong with discipline," she said. "And that's survivable. Wrong without discipline is just chaos." He held her gaze, nodded, went back to his position. 24 hours left, and the 8 of them held the line. Part 4, the final evolution. The 72 hours ended on a Thursday morning. Reynolds arrived at the OP at exactly the time the window closed. The way Reynolds always arrived, precisely without announcement, as if time itself had simply bent to accommodate his schedule. He walked into the position and stood there for a moment looking at what 8 people had built and maintained over 3 days and 3 nights, and he said nothing for a long time. The group was exhausted in the bone-deep way that goes past tired and into something closer to hollowed out. They had slept in rotation 2 hours at a time, and the sleep had been shallow and interrupted and not enough. They had eaten from their packs. They had managed 2 significant tests, the coordinated drone sweep in a ground incursion at hour 60 that Reynolds had sent a 2-man evaluator team to conduct approaching from the one angle the group had been watching most carefully, the northern ridge where thermal exposure was highest. They had not been found during the ground incursion. Maya had repositioned the group at hour 58, 2 hours before the incursion team arrived, because she had looked at the observation logs Rodriguez had been keeping and noticed a pattern, a subtle regularity in the way the evaluators had been timing their check-ins that suggested an active approach was being planned not from the direction most people would expect, but from the north, where a confident team might assume their thermal management was sufficient. She had repositioned. The evaluators had come from the north. They had found nothing. Now Reynolds looked at and he said, "Stand down, return to the facility." 8 people stood up. Several of them had to do it slowly, working joints that had been held in low positions for extended periods, managing the specific kind of physical discomfort that announces itself fully only once you allow your body to believe the demand is over. Boland stood up straight in 3 seconds, which Maya noticed and which told her something about the degree to which he had disciplined his physical responses over the course of this program. They walked back. Nobody talked much on the return movement. There was a particular silence that belongs to people who have been through something together and have not yet had enough distance from it to process what it was. The words would come later. Right now, there was just the walk and the weight of their gear, and the early morning light doing what early morning light does when you have been awake long enough to see it cycle back around. Rodriguez walked beside Maya for the last kilometer. I didn't say anything for most of it. Then he said, "You knew about the north approach." "I suspected," she said. "The logs," he said. "The timing pattern," she said. "If I was running an evaluator team, I would have cycled the check-ins to create a false rhythm and then inserted during the anomaly. Someone on their side is doing this the right way." Rodriguez was quiet. "You repositioned us based on a timing pattern in a log," he said. "Yes," she said. 2 hours before they arrived, he said. "Yes." He walked for a moment. "Carter," he said. You understand that what you just described is not a trainable skill," he said. "What you just described is what this entire program is trying to produce and cannot reliably produce because some people either have it or they don't." She looked at him. "My grandfather would disagree," she said. "He'd say it's learnable. It just takes longer than most programs allow." Rodriguez considered that. "How long did it take you?" he said. 20 years, she said. He nodded slowly. "That's longer than most programs allow," he said. She almost smiled. The debrief at the facility was the longest one yet. 2 hours, all 8 candidates together, Reynolds and 3 evaluators reviewing every element of the 72 hours in a level of detail that was simultaneously exhausting and clarifying. Every decision was examined, Every moment where the team had performed above expectation was noted. Every moment where friction had appeared was identified and discussed without judgment, but with complete honesty. The Fierro and Webb situation came up. Reynolds raised it directly, which surprised both of them. Hour 9, he said, there was a team friction event. It was managed. I want to hear from both of you about how it was managed and what the outcome was. Fierro looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, Carter pulled me aside and told me the truth. Reynolds looked at Maya. What did you tell him? Reynolds said. That his grievance was legitimate, but his timing was wrong, she said, and that functional was sufficient for the purpose of the evolution. Functional is sufficient, Reynolds repeated, not as a challenge, just as something worth saying twice. He wrote it down. And was it sufficient? Fierro said yes. Webb said yes. Reynolds moved on. Boland's leadership of the OP during the 3-hour absence when Patterson, Cho, and Maya had been called to the secondary evaluation was reviewed next. Boland, Reynolds said, you were handed a leadership position without preparation time. Talk me through your approach. Boland was quiet for a moment. I maintained the structure Carter had set up, he said. I didn't change assignments. I didn't introduce new decisions. My job was to keep what was working until she came back. Reynolds looked at him. And when you didn't know if she was coming back, he said. Boland met his gaze directly. Same thing, he said. If she didn't come back, I would have adapted. But I wasn't going to dismantle a structure that was performing just because the situation was uncertain. Reynolds wrote something. That, he said, is a more sophisticated answer than I expected from you at day one. Boland said nothing, but something in his posture shifted, not pride exactly. More like a man hearing something confirmed that he had only recently begun to believe about himself. Reynolds looked at Maya last. You declined the advanced selection, he said. The room went still. Several candidates hadn't known. Fierro looked up sharply. Webb's expression changed. Yes, Maya said. Tell me why. Reynolds said. I had a commitment, she said. 7 people were depending on a team structure that I had helped build. Leaving at hour 12 of 72 would have compromised that structure at a critical point. The advanced program was a significant opportunity, Reynolds said, one that may not recur. I understand that, she said, and you still declined. Yes, Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. The room was completely silent. Carter, he said, senior chief. The advanced selection was a test, he said. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. The advanced program is real, Reynolds said. Patterson and Cho did select into it, and their transfers have been processed. But the test was whether each of the 3 candidates called to that evaluation would make the decision based on personal advancement or based on their commitment to the current team. Maya did not move. Patterson and Cho made the expected decision, Reynolds said, the one most people in their position would make. It was not the wrong decision. The opportunity is genuine and they will benefit from it. He paused. You made a different decision. I want to make sure you understand what that decision demonstrated. That I stayed, she said. That you understood the terrain, he said. And those 4 words hit the room like a physical thing. Fierro looked at the table. Webb exhaled slowly. Rodriguez was completely still. Boland looked at Maya. She was looking at Reynolds. The final evaluation begins in 48 hours, Reynolds said. You have 48 hours to rest, resupply, and prepare. The evaluation will be comprehensive, individual, and conducted under conditions that will differ from everything you have trained in. He looked at the group one last time. 8 of you completed phase 3, he said. 8 is a number I have not seen in this program in 6 years. He closed his folder. Rest. He left. The room stayed quiet for another 10 seconds. Then Boland said to the room in general and to Maya specifically, he tested you. He tested all 3 of us, she said. He knew you'd say no, Boland said. He suspected, she said. There's a difference. Boland shook his head slowly. 48 hours, he said. I'm going to sleep for 30 of them. You'll sleep 12, Maya said, and then you'll spend the rest preparing. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Probably. The 48 hours passed differently than any other rest period in the program. There was a quality to it that was simultaneously lighter and heavier, lighter, because the immediate pressure of phase 3 had lifted, heavier because the final evaluation was now visible on the horizon, and visible pressure has a weight that invisible pressure does not. Maya slept 8 hours, not 12, not 30, 8 because 8 was what her body needed, and taking more than her body needed had always felt to her like a kind of waste. She spent 4 hours reviewing her 11 pages of operational notes. She spent 3 hours on a private range running dry fire drills. No ammunition, just the mechanical repetition of the movements. The trigger. Pull the breath control, the reset again and again until the mechanics stopped being actions she performed and became something closer to reflex. She spent 2 hours sitting with her grandfather's voice. Not literally, not calling anyone, just sitting quietly in the corner of the barracks and thinking about him, about Montana, about the specific quality of stillness he had taught her, that it was not passivity, but presence, the state of being so completely there that the environment around you became information rather than noise. She thought about the moment at 14 when she found his lost track in the snow and he had stood there looking at her face. She thought about what he had seen in her face in that moment. She thought it was probably something like this, the absence of surprise. Not because she had been confident she would find it, but because she had been prepared to look for it in preparation and confidence. Though they look the same from the outside, are fundamentally different things on the inside. Confidence can be shaken. Preparation cannot, because preparation is not a feeling. It is an inventory. It is what you know and what you have practiced and what you have learned to see, and none of those things disappear because the conditions become difficult. She wrote one more thing in her notebook. She wrote, "The evaluation will test what I know. I know enough." She closed the notebook. The morning of the evaluation, Reynolds gathered the 8 candidates at 0500 and handed each of them an individual envelope. Inside each envelope was a separate set of instructions, different for each candidate. Same mission, but comprehensive reconnaissance and precision engagement exercise in the same rugged California terrain they had been training in for 3 weeks. But individual routes, individual objectives, individual parameters, designed specifically for each candidate based on everything Reynolds and his evaluator team had observed over the past 21 days. Maya opened her envelope. She read it once. She read the part that made her stop. Her evaluation included a standard reconnaissance objective and a standard engagement sequence. Those were expected. Those were things she had trained for extensively and felt prepared for. What she had not trained for, specifically what nobody had briefed her, would be included was the final component of her evaluation, a leadership assessment conducted under real conditions. At some point during her individual evaluation, Reynolds' team would introduce a crisis variable, a simulated casualty, among a separate evaluation element, and Maya would be required to make a command decision about how to respond without compromising her own mission. She would not be told when. She would not be told the nature of the casualty. She would only be told that the decision she made would carry as much weight in her final evaluation as the precision engagement component. She folded the envelope. She put it in her pocket. She thought about it for exactly 60 seconds, turned it over in her mind, completely examined every angle she could anticipate, identified the core challenge at the center of it, which was not tactical but psychological, the same challenge Reynolds had been building towards since day one. The ability to hold 2 simultaneous demands in balance without allowing either one to compromise the other. Mission integrity and human responsibility. 60 seconds, then she put it away and focused on the terrain in front of her. She moved out at 0530. The first 2 hours were clean. She moved through the terrain with the accumulated competency of 3 weeks of daily refinement, reading the ground the way she had learned to read it, managing her profile, staying in the shadows when shadows were available, working with the land rather than across it. Her first objective, a simulated enemy cache location, was reached at hour 2:11 inside her window. She documented it with the precision Rodriguez had been logging with for 3 days, noting not just the location but the approach angles, the sight lines, the information a follow-on element would need. She moved to her second objective, hour 4. The crisis variable arrived. It arrived as a sound. A voice some distance to her south saying something in the controlled but strained tone of someone managing pain. Not screaming, not dramatic, just the voice of a person who needed help and was trying not to need it too loudly. Maya stopped moving. She identified the direction. She ran a rapid calculation. If she diverted, she would be at minimum 30 minutes behind her mission timeline. If the casualty was serious, the diversion could cost her the precision engagement window entirely. The final component of her evaluation, the engagement sequence, had a strict time perimeter that did not bend. She made the decision in 4 seconds. She moved toward the voice. Because there was a person, and a person was not a variable. She found one of the junior evaluators, a young petty officer she recognized from the facility but had not worked with, directly sitting against a rock formation, with his right hand pressed against his lower left leg, and an expression that said he was working very hard to appear less injured than he was. She knelt beside him. "What happened?" she said. "Twisted in a draw," he said. "Felt something go. I can weight it, but I can't weight it well." She assessed, looked at the angle of his leg, the position he had settled into, the way he was distributing his body weight. "Ankle," she said, "a grade 2 at minimum." "I called it in," he said. "Support is 20 minutes out." "Can you stay here 20 minutes without moving?" she said. "Yes," he said. She believed him. "I'm going to stabilize the joint before I go," she said. "It will hurt for about 30 seconds, and then it will be better." "You don't have to." 20 seconds, she said. She worked quickly. Her grandfather had taught her field first aid the same way he had taught her everything else, by doing it until she could do it without thinking about it. She had the ankle stabilized in 90 seconds, which was 30 seconds over her own estimate, because the terrain she was working in was awkward. The petty officer looked at her when she was done. "You're going to miss your window," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Carter, support is 20 minutes out," she said. "You have water." "Yes." "Stay still until they get here," she said. She stood up. She started moving. She moved faster than she had moved at any point in the evaluation. Not reckless fast, the specific speed of someone who has identified a clear objective and removed every unnecessary element from their movement, who has decided that the next 14 minutes are going to be the most focused 14 minutes of the day. She reached the engagement area with 6 minutes inside her window. 6 minutes. She had lost 23 minutes to the diversion, and she had made up 17 of them through focused movement, and she had arrived with 6 minutes to spare, which was not comfortable and was not the margin she would have preferred, but was enough. She established her position in 90 seconds. Wind read, distance confirmed, breath controlled. 5 targets at variable distances between 200 and 500 yards. She engaged them in sequence. The wind shifted between the third and fourth target, a direction change that would have caught a shooter who wasn't reading the terrain continuously, who was relying on the initial read rather than the ongoing one. Maya had been reading it continuously. She adjusted. She fired. 5 for 5. When she stood up from the position and turned around, Reynolds was standing 20 meters behind her. He had been there for the last 4 engagements. She had not known. He was holding a notebook. He looked at her. "You diverted?" he said. "Yes," she said. 90 seconds on the stabilization, he said. "I timed it." "It would have been 60 if the terrain had been cooperative," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost." "You made up 17 minutes, he said. 6 minutes inside the window," she said. "Why did you divert?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "Because there was a person," she said. "Your mission timeline was recoverable," she said. "A person in the field is not a recoverable variable if you leave them without stabilization." Reynolds looked at his notebook. "The evaluator's injury was a simulation," he said. She held his gaze. "I didn't know that," she said. "And if I had, it wouldn't have changed the decision." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Why not?" he said. "Because the day it changes the decision is the day I've stopped being the person this work requires," she said. "A sniper who calculates human cost purely against mission efficiency is a liability, not an asset." Reynolds wrote something. He wrote for longer than he usually wrote. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who hadn't spent 3 weeks learning to read the almost invisible signals in Reynolds's face. But Maya had spent 3 weeks learning exactly that. What she read was this: he had been waiting for that answer. Not hoping for it, not expecting it with certainty, but waiting for it the way you wait for something you think might be there but cannot confirm until you see it directly. He had seen it. "Return to the facility," he said. "Debrief at 1400. She walked back. Hour 11 of the evaluation day. The final debrief. All 8 candidates assembled. Reynolds and his full evaluator team at the front of the room. Reynolds spoke for 4 minutes. He covered the group performance data for the evaluation. Overall completion rates, objective success metrics, performance against the technical standards the program had been built around. 7 of 8 candidates had completed all primary objectives within their time windows. One candidate, Webb, had missed his precision engagement window by 4 minutes after a navigation error in the approach phase that had cost him time he couldn't recover. Reynolds said that Webb's overall program performance remained strong and that the evaluation result would be considered in full context. Webb nodded. Then Reynolds said, "I want to address one specific element of today's evaluation." The room was attentive. One candidate encountered the crisis variable and made a decision that I want the entire group to hear, he said, because the decision is instructive, not just as an individual choice, but as a model for how this work is supposed to be approached. He looked at Maya. Carter encountered a simulated casualty at hour 4 of her evaluation, he said. She diverted from her mission timeline, spent 90 seconds on field stabilization, and then recovered 17 of the 23 minutes she had lost in order to reach her engagement window with 6 minutes to spare. The room was quiet. She completed the engagement 5 for 5, Reynolds said, under a significant wind shift between the third and fourth target. He paused. When I asked her why she diverted knowing it threatened her mission timeline, she said because there was a person. He let that sit in the room. 4 words, he said. Because there was a person. I have been running this program for 11 years. I have asked that question to candidates in simulated crisis scenarios many times. Most people give me tactical answers, calculated answers, answers about mission priority and operational continuity and acceptable risk. He paused again. Carter gave me the right answer. Boland was looking at the table. Fierro was looking at Maya. Rodriguez was looking at Reynolds. The right answer, Reynolds continued, is not the tactical answer. The right answer is the human one, because the day an operator loses the ability to make a human decision under pressure, they have become something that cannot be trusted in the environments where this work actually happens. He closed his folder. Program evaluation results will be posted at 0600 tomorrow, he said. Tonight, rest. He stood. He walked out. The room sat with everything that had just been said for a long moment. Then Boland looked at Maya. He looked at her the way he had never looked at her in the first week. Not with assessment, not with challenge, with something that if you had asked him 3 weeks ago whether he was capable of it in this context, he would have said no. Respect, genuine, unperformed, unconditional respect. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She saw it. She nodded once, and that was enough. That night in the quiet of the barracks, Maya took out her notebook one last time. She turned to the last page she had written on the page where she had written, "The evaluation will test what I know. I know enough." She read it. She turned to the next blank page. She wrote one sentence. She wrote, "It was never about being the best. It was about being ready." She closed the notebook. She put it on the shelf above her bunk. She turned off her light. And in the dark, with the weight of everything that had happened over 3 weeks settling around her like something she could finally put down, she heard her grandfather's voice one more time, clear and low and certain the way it had always been. He said, "You trusted what you saw." She closed her eyes. She had. She slept. Part 5, the name they would remember. The results were posted at 0600, exactly as Reynolds had said they would be. Maya was already awake when the list went up. She had been awake for 40 minutes, sitting on the edge of her bunk in the dark, not anxious exactly, but present in the particular way she had learned to be present when something important was about to happen, fully there, fully aware, not leaning toward the outcome, but not running from it either. She heard Fierro get up. She heard him walk to the corridor. She heard him stop. Then she heard him say quietly but distinctly, "Carter." She got up. The list was a single sheet of paper taped to the corkboard outside the main briefing room. 8 names, 7 of them had a notation beside them: program, completion status, next assignment, details, follow-on recommendation categories ranging from standard to advanced. Beside Maya's name, the notation was different from all the others. It read Distinguished Graduate, Advanced Assignment, Naval Special Warfare Command, Instructor Track Authorization. She read it twice. She read it a third time not because she hadn't understood it, but because she needed the 3 seconds it took to let it become real, rather than something she had imagined. Fierro was standing beside her. "Instructor Track," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's," he started, and then stopped. because he was a man who knew enough about this world to know exactly what that notation meant, and the words that came naturally weren't adequate. Carter, that's not a normal result. No, she said. Reynolds authorized that himself, Fierro said. That's not a committee decision. One person makes that call, and it's Reynolds. She looked at the list. Boland's name was there. Standard completion, advanced assignment, strong follow-on recommendation, exactly the result his performance had earned, and it was a genuinely strong result. Rodriguez's notation was similar with an additional intelligence specialization recommendation that fit him precisely. Webb had completed with a conditional notation tied to the missed engagement window, but with a follow-on recommendation that confirmed his overall program standing, 7 solid results. And then Maya's. Boland came out of the barracks 30 seconds later. He had his boots on and his jacket half-zipped, and the expression of someone who had also been awake for a while and had been waiting for this moment with a quality of anticipation he hadn't entirely managed to suppress. He read the list. He read it from top to bottom. When he got to Maya's notation, he stopped. He stood there for 4 seconds. Then he turned to her. Distinguished graduate, he said. Yes, she said. Instructor track, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his face, in the specific configuration of a man who had spent 3 weeks being comprehensively wrong about another person and had spent the last week and a half coming to terms with exactly how wrong he had been, there was something that was more complex than admiration and more honest than envy. It was reckoning. The particular kind that arrives when you see a result that confirms everything you should have understood from the beginning. And the confirmation is both a relief and a weight, because it means the story you told yourself in the first week about who she was and what she was capable of and why she was there was not just incorrect, but was the opposite of the truth. I told you on day 1 you wouldn't survive Hell Week, he said. You did, she said. I was wrong, he said. Yes, I was wrong about everything, he said. And he said it plainly without qualification, without the diplomatic softening that people add when they're acknowledging a mistake they're not entirely ready to fully own. Just directly, simply. The way Maya had learned that the most honest people deliver the most honest things without ceremony, without performance, with nothing extra added. She looked at him. You weren't wrong about everything, she said. You were wrong about me. That's specific. He held her gaze. Is that supposed to make me feel better? He said. It's supposed to be accurate, she said. You're a strong operator, Boland. You've always been. That was never the question. The question was whether you could be a strong operator and also be wrong at the same time. And the answer turned out to be yes. He was quiet for a moment. Most people can't hold those two things at once, she said. A lot of people decide that if they're wrong about something, it means they're weak. So they double down instead of adjusting. You adjusted. That's not nothing. He looked at the list again. Instructor track, he said again, more quietly this time. You're going to be teaching this. Eventually, she said, the candidates who come through here, he said, they're going to have you as their baseline for what this looks like. She hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms yet. She had read the notation. She had understood what it meant technically. But the implication of it, that her performance over these 3 weeks would now become the standard that future candidates were held against, that her name would be on the wall of this program, not as an anomaly, but as a reference point that had not yet fully arrived. It arrived now. Standing in the corridor at 0600 with Fierro on one side and Boland on the other, and the early morning quiet around them, and that sheet of paper on the corkboard. It arrived and settled into her chest and sat there with a weight that was not heavy in the bad way, but heavy in the way that things are heavy when they matter. She breathed. Then I'll make sure the baseline is worth something, she said. Rodriguez came out next. He read the list with the same unhurried composure he brought to everything. And when he finished, he nodded once in the way that was his version of a significant response. He looked at Maya. Distinguished graduate, he said. So I'm told, she said. Reynolds doesn't give that notation lightly, Rodriguez said. I've looked into this program. He's given it 4 times in 11 years. She hadn't known that. 4 times in 11 years. She filed it. You deserved it, Rodriguez said, simply without embellishment. Thank you, she said. He nodded and went back inside. Fierro was still standing beside her. For what it's worth, Fierro said, when Reynolds asked me in the debrief how the team friction was managed, when I said, you pulled me aside and told me the truth. I want you to know that was the most useful conversation I had during this entire program. What you said to me in those 3 minutes changed how I'm going to lead for the rest of my career. She looked at him. All I did was tell you what you already knew, she said. People forget what they know under pressure, Fierro said. Having someone remind you directly without softening it, that's not a small thing. She thought about her grandfather, about the way he had never softened anything, about how the absence of softening had felt at 8 years old, at 10, at 12, like the world not caring whether things were easy for her, and how it had felt by 16 like the greatest gift he could have given her. The truth without the cushion. The standard without the exception. The same thing Reynolds had been doing for 3 weeks in this program. My grandfather taught me that, she said. Fierro smiled, a real one, the first she had seen from him. He sounds like Reynolds, he said. Less intimidating, she said, but same general approach. They both laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that comes out of exhaustion and relief and genuine connection. And it lasted maybe 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds were the most relaxed Maya had felt in 22 days. The formal graduation was held at 1400 hours that same day. It was not elaborate. This program did not produce elaborate ceremonies. There was a room and there were chairs and there were the 8 candidates and Reynolds and the evaluator team and 2 senior Naval Special Warfare Command officers whose names Maya had been given, but whose presence she registered primarily as confirmation that what happened in this room was being seen by people with the authority to act on it. Reynolds spoke for 7 minutes. He talked about the program's purpose, about what precision, intelligence, and reconnaissance capabilities meant in the current operational environment, about what it required of the people who carried those capabilities, not just technical excellence, but the kind of judgment that cannot be taught in a classroom and cannot be produced by physical demand alone, but only emerges, if it emerges at all, from the specific combination of preparation, pressure, and character. He talked about the class. He said 8 completions was extraordinary by this program's historical standards. He said the class had demonstrated collectively and individually a level of performance that would set a new benchmark for what was possible. And then he looked at Maya. One candidate in this class, he said, demonstrated something that I will be talking about in this program for years. The room was completely still. Not a technical achievement, he said. Not a record, not a score. He paused. A decision. He told the room about hour 4 of the evaluation day, about the sound Maya had heard, about the diversion, about the 90 seconds, about the 17 minutes recovered, about arriving at the engagement window with 6 minutes to spare. He told them about the 5 for 5 targets at variable distances under a wind shift between the 3rd and 4th. He told them about what she said when he asked her why she had diverted. Because there was a person. The room sat with that. One of the 2 senior officers, a captain whose name Maya had been given as Hargrove, was looking at her with an expression that she read as something she had not encountered in a very long time from someone in that position. Direct, uncomplicated assessment. Not evaluation exactly, more like recognition, Reynolds concluded his remarks. He called each candidate forward in turn and shook their hand and said something to them quietly that the rest of the room could not hear. When he called Maya forward, she walked to him and he shook her hand and looked at her and said in the same flat, direct voice he used for everything, "Your grandfather would be proud." She had not expected that. She had not expected anything in particular from Reynolds in this moment, because Reynolds had never been a man who told you what to expect. But she had not expected that. She held his gaze. "Thank you, Senior Chief," she said. And her voice was steady because she made it steady the same way she had made her breathing steady in the Montana wilderness at 16, the same way she had made her hands steady on the range under every stress drill this program had thrown at her. But something behind her eyes was not steady. Something behind her eyes was 16 years old and standing in the snow, watching her grandfather realize he had been wrong about her, and it was 31 years old and standing in this room, hearing the most demanding instructor she had ever encountered tell her that the man who had built everything she was would have been proud of what she had done with it. Reynolds released her hand. She walked back to her seat. Captain Hargrove caught her eye as she sat down. He nodded, one nod. Brief, but deliberate. She nodded back. After the ceremony, as people were collecting their materials and preparing to move to the post-graduation processing, that would formalize their assignment orders. Boland found her. He waited until there was a natural opening, until the immediate crowd around her had thinned, and then he walked to where she was standing, and he said without preamble, without the performance layer he had carried for the first 2 weeks, "I want to ask you something." "Okay," she said. "When you walked into the barracks on day one and I said what I said he said, and you didn't respond, you didn't say anything, you just unpacked your bag." "Yes," she said. "What were you thinking?" he said. "In that moment, what was actually going through your head?" She looked at him. She considered whether to give him the polished version or the true one. She gave him the true one. "I was thinking about my grandfather," she said. "I was thinking about a specific afternoon when I was 12 years old, and I was tracking a mule deer through heavy brush, and I lost the track because I got impatient and moved before I should have. And my grandfather didn't say anything. He just waited, and eventually I found it again because I stopped moving and started looking." Boland listened. "I was thinking that this room was the brush," she said, "and you were the noise. And my job was not to react to the noise, but to find the track." He was quiet for a moment. "The track being what?" he said. "The reason I was there," she said. "The work, the thing I came to do." He stood with that for a moment. "I was the noise," he said. "You were noise," she said. "You're not noise anymore." He looked at the floor. "What am I now?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "Someone I'd want beside me in the field," she said, "when it matters." He looked up, and that more than anything else that had happened over the past 3 weeks, more than the evaluations and the results and the notation, beside her name on the corkboard, seemed to hit Travis Boland with a force he hadn't prepared for. Because it was true. She meant it. And he knew she meant it because he had spent 3 weeks learning to read her, and Maya Carter did not say things she didn't mean. "Okay," he said, "just that, okay," but the way he said it carried everything that people mean when they've run out of adequate words and they say the simplest one that's left. The post-graduation processing took 2 hours and produced a stack of orders and authorizations and paperwork that confirmed in the official language of the United States Navy what the corkboard notation had already said. When Maya walked out of that building with her orders in hand, the California afternoon was bright and clear, and the air had that particular quality it gets after 3 weeks of intensive outdoor training. Familiar, almost intimate, like a place she had lived long enough to know its specific smells and light and the way sound moved through it. Captain Hargrove was standing outside. He was waiting for her. She stopped. "Carter," he said. "Captain," she said. "Captain," she said. "I read your background before I came today," he said. "Intelligence specialist, 10 years. Request for this program came from your own initiative." "Yes, sir," she said. "Reynolds told me about the crisis variable decision," he said. "Before the ceremony, he told me what you said." "Yes, sir." "Because there was a person," Hargrove said. "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a moment. "I've been in this work for 28 years, he said. "I have watched a lot of very capable people come through this pipeline. I have watched some of them become technically exceptional and operationally unreliable because they lost the thread somewhere between the training and the application." He paused. "The thread being what you demonstrated today." She waited. "The understanding that the mission is not a separate thing from the people inside it," he said. "That technical precision without human judgment is a weapon pointed in an unpredictable direction." She was quiet. "The instructor track we've authorized for you," he said, "is not a ceremonial designation. We need people in this training pipeline who have what you have, not your specific skills, though those are exceptional, the way you think, the way you make decisions under genuine pressure." He paused. "Are you prepared for that responsibility?" She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. "Yes, sir," she said. He nodded. "One more thing," he said. "Reynolds told me about the first morning. What Boland said, what several people in that room said." She said nothing. "He said you didn't respond," Hargrove said. "No, sir." "Why not?" he said. She had answered a version of this question for Boland 20 minutes ago. The answer she gave Hargrove was different, not because the truth was different, but because the truth had more than one true face, and the face that was right for Hargrove was not the same as the one that was right for Boland. "Because I already knew who I was," she said. "And I knew that what they thought of me in that moment had nothing to do with what I was going to become in the next 3 weeks. So the only response that made any sense was to go and become it. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is the answer. He extended his hand. She shook it. He walked away. She stood there for a moment with her orders in her hand and the California afternoon around her and the weight of everything that had happened settling into a shape she could finally see completely. 3 weeks ago, she had walked into a barracks and a room full of people had decided in the first 30 seconds that she was a mistake, a miscalculation, something that had wandered in from the wrong story. She had not argued. She had not defended herself. She had simply gone and done what she had spent her entire life preparing to do. And now the program that had laughed at her arrival was going to use her performance as the standard against which future candidates were measured. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the evening she was 16 and they had found the missing hiker and her grandfather had said, "You trusted what you saw, not what they thought." She understood it now in a way she hadn't then. She understood it not as advice, but as description, not as something he was telling her to do, but as something he was telling her she had already done, was already doing, had been doing since she was 8 years old, sitting in the Montana woods counting animals, while he counted more, and neither of them knew yet that she was going to outcount him by the time she was 12. She understood that what he had given her was not a skill. It was a way of being. Patience was not a technique she applied. Observation was not a practice she performed. Precision was not a standard she aimed for. They were what she was. They were what 20 years of a man who loved her deeply and never told her it would be easy had built her into. And what you are is not something that can be taken from you by the loudest voice in a room or the most confident opinion from someone who looked at you and saw only the surface of a thing and called that surface the whole truth. What you are survives all of that. It just keeps going. Rodriguez found her before she left the facility. He came up beside her with the quiet precision that was entirely him and stood there for a moment without speaking, which was also entirely him, and she waited because she had learned that Rodriguez's pauses had content. "I've been thinking about what Reynolds said," he said, "about your decision at hour 4. "What about it?" she said. "He said most people give tactical answers," Rodriguez said, "calculated ones. Mission priority, operational continuity, acceptable risk." "Yes," she said. "But those aren't wrong answers," he said. "In a different context, in a real operational scenario, those calculations are not wrong." "No," she said, "they're not." "So what made yours right?" he said. "Not better, right. What was the specific thing that made your answer the right one in that moment?" She thought about it. "The scenario was a test," she said. "And the test was not of my tactical reasoning. The test was of my values. And when someone is testing your values, the only right answer is to show them what your values actually are, not what you think they want to hear, not what sounds operationally sophisticated." She paused. "What you actually believe." Rodriguez looked at her. "And what you actually believe," he said, "is that a person is not acceptable collateral against a training timeline." "What I actually believe," she said, "is that the day I start doing the math on whether a person is worth the detour is the day I've become something my grandfather would not recognize." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "That's a high standard," he said. "It's the right standard," she said. He nodded. "Same time next program," he said. She looked at him. "I'll be the instructor," she said. He almost smiled. "Then I'll try to give you something to work with," he said. He walked away. She watched him go. 3 months later, the first class of candidates Maya Carter instructed assembled on the same grinder, where she had stood on a Tuesday morning in March and heard a room full of people decide she was a mistake. She arrived before them. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back. She watched them come in 16 candidates, the same number as her own class, the same mix of backgrounds and experiences and faces carrying the weight of their own histories, their own reasons for being there, their own version of the morning. She had stood in that barracks and heard the laughter. Some of them looked at each other. Some of them looked at her. One of them, a young candidate in the back of the group, smaller than the others, standing with a particular stillness of someone who had already decided they were going to have to prove something, looked at her and held eye contact for a moment before looking away. Maya recognized that look. She had worn it herself. She looked at the group for a long time. Then she said, 16 of you walked in here today. And the words that came after were not exactly Reynolds's words because they were hers, shaped by everything she was and everything she had been given and everything she had earned. She told them what patience meant. She told them what observation meant. She told them what precision meant. She told them that the greatest weapon in the work they were gaining for was not the rifle and not the terrain and not the technology. It was the mind behind all of it. And the mind was only as reliable as the discipline that had built it, and the discipline was only as strong as the understanding that drove it, and the understanding, the real kind, the kind that didn't break under pressure, came from one place and one place only. Knowing who you were before anyone else had the chance to decide it for you. The small candidate in the back of the group was listening very carefully. Maya noticed. She filed it away. She would watch that one. Because she already knew the way her grandfather had known about her in the Montana woods when she was 8 years old counting animals and coming up short, that this was someone who saw things others missed and was still learning to trust what they saw. Her job now was what his had been. Not to make it easy, not to remove the doubt or soften the terrain or lower the standard. Her job was to stand beside them in the difficulty and tell the truth and wait and keep waiting. Until they found it themselves, the way she had, the way it has always worked for anyone who was ever told they didn't belong and decided quietly without argument, without performance, without needing the room to agree to go and become exactly what every doubting voice in that room had insisted they could not. Maya Carter walked into a room where people laughed. She left that room as someone they studied. And the distance between those two things was not luck and was not exception and was not the story of a woman who overcame the odds, because the odds were never the point. The point was preparation. The point was patience. The point was the 20 years of a man who loved her, teaching her to see what others missed, and the 3 weeks of a program that tried everything it had to find the limit of what she was. And the moment she looked at Travis Boland on the first morning and said nothing, because she already knew that results were the only language that mattered in a room that had already made up its mind. She answered them, not with words, with work. With every decision she made, from the moment she arrived to the moment she stood at the front of a new class with her hands behind her back and 16 new candidates waiting to discover what they were capable of. She had been the woman nobody saw coming. Now she was the standard they all had to meet. And she had built that standard the same way her grandfather had built her. Not in a moment, not in a single achievement, not in a result posted on a corkboard at 0600 on a Thursday morning, but across a lifetime of choosing again and again and again to trust what she saw over what they thought. That was the whole story. That was always the whole story.